Zara twirled the mug in her hands and stared gloomily ahead. She was deep in thought as she contemplated her life choices. There was no hiding from it. Things had gone from bad to worse. She'd moved to several different worlds in recent years. Indley was the 7th planet where she'd tried to settle down and earn some credits. She'd been spending a few years on each planet before moving on to the next one. She often chose the next destination without much thought, preferring to live in the moment, and as long as there was air to breathe and food to live off, she didn't care where she was. But, unfortunately for Zara, there were more important things to think about. Namely, the accumulation of credits and the search for work as she tried to make her way in life. She glanced angrily around the huge room of the local trade guild. It was a high-ceilinged room with hundreds of tables, half of which were occupied, despite the early morning hours. The local traders, or profiteers as Zara liked to think of them, were busy discussing deals amongst each other. They were mostly strange-looking, fat little men who were almost all shorter than Zara. Most of them spoke Akaran, the most common language in their cluster. It was an old language which had survived right from the days of the earliest known civilization in the area. Too many people knew the language for it to die out, and it was still used extensively. Fortunately for Zara, though, it wasn't everyone's choice of communication. Along the walls of the hall were private booths for some of the wealthier clients, but Zara didn't have enough influence for one of those. She offered her services from a less impressive table set in the middle of the hall. Since she'd set up there, Zara had got very used to the idea of this table as a kind of office, as she sat there in the hope of a customer's arrival. Business could be slow, and it wasn't unusual for her to wait 2 or 3 days between jobs. Some of the locals knew where she sat, and when they came, she would be hired for a couple of hours of negotiations before being left to her own devices again. For several months now, Zara had been scraping by with barely enough income to cover her rent. Her last long-term project had ended badly. She'd quit her job to take up something which had seemed lucrative at the time, but the competition from the local competitors had proved too stiff for the new startup, and the whole endeavor ended up being a complete flop. She'd been left without a job, and now here she was sitting at a cheap table, drinking cheap coffee without a gram of pollen to her name. To add insult to injury, word got around that she'd been part of this failed project, which made it very hard for her to get a good seat again in the trading hall. She blamed herself for all of it, telling herself that her restless character and constant desire to earn more credit had led her to this situation. But she also knew that she couldn't help herself. She often only felt alive when she was taking risks or doing something daring. She liked living in the moment.